Today on Sugar Spun Run, I'll be showing you how to make my favorite homemade pie crust. Hey Sugar Spun Bakers, Sam here, and today I am so excited to be sharing another carefully tested, well-researched, and perfected recipe. This homemade pie crust recipe is one you may actually recognize if you've been following me for a while. I did a video of it previously a few years ago. Over time, I've scaled up the recipe slightly just because I wanted a little bit more dough to work with when I was making my pies. It's super simple, it uses a secret ingredient for the best tasting pie crust of your life. I think you're going to love it, so let's go ahead and get started. Now today's recipe is done in the food processor. I do have some notes in the recipe card if you don't have a food processor, but if you have one, use it. It's going to make this so much easier. On the food processor, we're going to combine 1 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour, 2 teaspoons of granulated sugar, 1/4 teaspoon of table salt, and we'll just pop our lid on and just briefly pulse everything together to get it nicely mixed. Now the next thing you're going to need is 8 tablespoons of very cold unsalted butter, and I am going to cut this up into small pieces and then just sprinkle that over the flour mixture. Now once again, we're going to just briefly pulse everything together until that butter gets nicely distributed. Now I do want to show you, this is looking pretty good. The butter is not completely absorbed into the flour. In fact, if I use a spoon to give you a peek at it, you can see there are some discernible pieces of butter in here. They're like chocolate chip size or pea-sized pieces of butter remaining. That's perfect. So the next thing you need is our secret ingredient, which is sour cream. You will need 1/4 cup of full fat sour cream, and we'll just scrape this right into the food processor, add our lid. And once again, we're just going to pulse until the mixture starts to cling together. Now let me show you real quickly. It just takes a couple pulses. And the mixture, as you can see, looks really dry and crumbly still, but if you can pick it up and if you squeeze it between your thumb and your fingers and it holds together, this is actually perfect. You don't need to go any further. My mom always goes further. She, in my opinion, overdoes her pie crust just a little bit, but it always works for her, so don't freak out if you go further than I did. Always remove your blade first. And this is a really crumbly dough, obviously, so I just like to use my hand to kind of pinch some of it together. That way it doesn't go everywhere when I turn it out into my counter. And then we will work this dough together and form it into a disc. And I like to get my edges as nice and as smooth as possible. You never want to overwork the dough when you're working with pastry, but I think it's worth it to try to get the edges smooth. It's just going to make it a little bit easier when you go to roll out your pie dough. All right, now this dough is going to need to chill. So we are going to take some plastic wrap and we'll wrap it up. And this is going to need to go into our fridge where it will chill for at least 30 minutes. I like to say usually closer to 45 to 60 minutes before you can roll it out. Now you can also make this, I'd say 3 to 5 days in advance of actually using it. It'll keep in your refrigerator just fine that way. You may just need to let it sit at room temperature for a couple minutes before you can roll it out if you keep it in the fridge longer than an hour. Okay, so once your dough has had some time to chill, we can go ahead and unwrap it, and you'll just want to place it on a clean, lightly floured surface. Now the big thing about pie dough is you do not want to be afraid to use as much flour as you need. You also want to make sure that it's not sticking to the counter while you're rolling it out. So I am usually moving mine pretty frequently and adding flour underneath as I go. Now let's go ahead and roll this out. And you may get a little bit of cracking on the edges. That's not really a big deal, but if your dough is really difficult to roll or if it's cracking in the center, it may just be too cold. You might just want to let it sit on the counter for a couple minutes before you continue trying to roll it out. And as you can see, I'm just checking periodically, making sure this isn't sticking to the counter and adding more flour underneath as needed. Do not hesitate to add more flour if you need to. All right, now how large you roll out your pie dough depends on your pie plate. Today I am using my larger 10-inch pie plate, so I just like to flip the pie plate over and look at the size. I want to make sure I have some space around the rim. This is actually looking pretty good. So we'll roll up our pie crust, and the easiest way to transfer your pie crust is just to roll it around your rolling pin very gently, and then we will gently transfer it over to our pie plate. Look at that. All right, once you have your pie dough in your pie plate, you have a couple of options. You can trim your pie crust so you have a nice smooth edge. You can crimp it right onto the side. One thing I like to do is I like a slightly thicker crust. So I don't usually trim much of my pie dough. I will take the edges and I'll just kind of fold it underneath itself. So I have a smooth edge. The more ragged pieces are getting hidden. And then, as I said, you could just crimp the edges with a fork. I like to flute the pie dough, and I'm not really great at making mine look nice most of the time, so I'll usually go around twice. And one thing to note, especially if you're going to be blind baking this pie crust, is it really helps if you can kind of rest that pie dough on the lip of the pie plate. So you're not just doing it inside the pie plate, but you're doing it up on the lip. That way the pie crust sort of bakes to the lip of the pie plate instead of sinking in on itself, which is a common problem when blind baking. Now, if you're making a pie that does not require blind baking, this pie crust is ready to go. Use it in any recipe that you would like. If it does need to be blind baked, stay tuned for my next video where I will show you exactly how to blind bake this pie crust. I hope you guys enjoyed this super simple recipe. This is my all-time favorite pie crust. I know I already said it, but I think you're going to absolutely love it. If you haven't already tried it, please do and let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.